Hello everyone and welcome to Forever Rugby, and on the back of what was a fairly scrappy, fairly subpar, I suppose, kind of weekend of Super Rugby, South African Rugby are set to announce the decision regarding the Springboks participation in the Rugby Championship early this week, apparently. So the Rugby Championship at this stage is set to go ahead. And Australia and New Zealand have actually already kick-started the international calendar, I suppose, with the first of the Bledisloe Cup matches happening yesterday, which saw Australia and New Zealand play out to a 16-all draw, which is quite an interesting result and a very interesting game, and quite a big statement by Australia that they can actually compete with New Zealand, because often, you know, it's been a largely one-sided affair, as has most clashes with New Zealand in the preceding years. So Argentina have already departed for Australia and are, you know, preparing the quarantine sort of situation, stuff like that, as they're prepared to play in the 2020 Rugby Championship, which is set to get underway on the 7th of November and will run for a month until about 12th of December, I think it was. And at this stage, everything hinges on whether the Springboks are going to go and play. And Jacques Nienaber and SA Rugby sort of clarified last weekend that they are still waiting on what the decision is and whether they are going to be playing in the Rugby Championship, and a decision will be made in, you know, either sort of in the next couple of days, really. They said early this week, because obviously there's not a lot of time. You know, if you have to factor in a quarantine period and the likes, you know, the squad needs to leave in the next couple of weeks. So and quite probably anything else, they need to actually be able to select a squad, and it's still unclear what's going to happen in terms of the availability of the international players and what will happen. And a lot of the South African coaches are saying that they wouldn't like to see the Springboks go over to play the Rugby Championship. They say that we haven't had enough rugby, given that we played just 3 matches, really, 3 weeks since our rugby returned in South Africa, in comparison to Australia and New Zealand, who have been playing for the last couple of months and have played a reasonable amount of rugby and are much better prepared for the tournament than South Africa is. And especially because we are defending the title, that at this stage, are we going to go overseas to play in the Rugby Championship just for the sake of being in the Rugby Championship? Or are we going to take a decision that we are not yet ready to compete at the level we would like to, and thus we are going to withdraw and pull out and not travel over to Australia and be part of the tournament? And there's pros and cons for both, really. I mean, the big thing is, obviously we don't want to see a Springbok squad go over there and lose, really, and get dominated simply because of the lack of rugby. However, it's also, you know, you start to wonder how much Test rugby are we going to actually get before the British and Irish Lions tour next year. So it becomes a unique opportunity where it's almost could be possibly that the last opportunity to play some Test rugby ahead of the British and Irish Lions tour. And so there's lots of different sort of factors that are into it. In terms of the feasibility, in terms of logistically, can we go do it? The South African Department of Sport and Recreation last week released sort of guidelines and approved the return for international sport. We had to find out playing against Zambia over the weekend. So South African sport, international sport, can return. So in theory, the Springboks are allowed to go and play in international events. The thing that what they're waiting on clarity is how this works in terms of having to travel over to Australia. What will it mean for players when they come back, for example? How it's all going to work? What are the logistics? And that is the latest that's coming out of the SA Rugby camp, is that they are engaging with the Department of Sport and Recreation to come up with a plan and a final sort of overview of exactly what the story is. Because if they then go ahead and commit to playing in the Rugby Championship, then literally, possibly after this weekend or the next, a Springbok squad will have to be announced and will have to travel. There's not much time for training as a squad. There's not much time for preparation, and there's not a lot of rugby that's happening. And Jake White was saying, he said he didn't think it would be fair for the Springboks to expect to go and play, given the lack of rugby. And we are seeing a lot of the effects of what's happening because of such a long absence. A lot of players are struggling with injury, small niggles, and lots of, you know, like just small things are popping up because players haven't played. Dwayne Vermeulen, for example, picked up not necessarily the injury, but a bit of a knock, and the players aren't quite yet ready physically to go and play rugby, let alone go and play Test rugby against New Zealand, the best team in the world after South Africa, and Australia and Argentina are always, decent opponents. So it's a bit of a catch-22, because obviously if you look at the normal calendar, we normally play a full Super Rugby building up into an incoming tour in sort of June, July, and then the Rugby Championship in August, September. So there's a lot of rugby that happens before these tours, and the players are physically ready and are in shape. Whereas now the players are still getting back into sort of match fitness, match sharpness, and still getting used to taking all the contact stuff like that. So it's a very unique situation. But on the other hand, do we want to risk not playing in the Rugby Championship with so much happening next year and possibly changing in terms of South African clubs going overseas, the franchises going and playing overseas in a Pro 16, and the entire restructuring of our domestic competition? It is quite important that we make an effort, regardless of what direction we're going to go, into our international setup. If we are still going to be playing in the north for our franchises, but playing in the Rugby Championship as the Springboks, as opposed to sort of seeking out for a sort of 6, 7, 8 nations, which has also been a possible future sort of plan, and to leave Sanzar completely and move completely north. So given the fact that, it's probably a preference to try and remain within the Rugby Championship, but then making the move north from a franchise level, so that we are playing within Europe against European players, but on an international stage we're still getting to play New Zealand twice a year, which is very important given the fact that it's the biggest rivalry in World Rugby. It's the biggest match in World Rugby, Springboks versus New Zealand. So lots of different factors to consider. Hopefully a decision coming up in the next day or two. We'll obviously keep you very updated on what's going on. Obviously previews on what's happening on Super Rugby this weekend. Make sure you check out a reaction over the weekend of what happened this past weekend, players to watch, and all of that. Please make sure you like, subscribe to the channel. We're almost at 100. Thank you very much for all the support. Please continue subscribing and becoming part of the channel. My name is Stephen Pettit. Have a very good week, and I'll chat to you soon.